There is a strip of water in the Middle East that is 30 miles wide at its narrowest point. 30 miles. You could drive it in less than half an hour. It is smaller than the English Channel, narrower than the Bass Strait, shorter than almost any body of water you have ever heard of. And it controls the global economy. Right now, as you watch this video, the Strait of Hormuz is at the center of the most significant geopolitical crisis in years. Ships have been struck. Tankers are on fire. The Iranian military has issued warnings prohibiting navigation through its waters. Oil prices are surging. Governments on every continent are watching a 30-mile strip of water with a kind of focused, anxious attention that tells you everything about how much depends on it. But here is what the news coverage almost never explains. The raw, staggering facts about what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. What flows through it? What happens to the world if it closes? And why a single waterway that most people couldn't find on a map holds more power over your daily life than almost any decision made by any government on Earth. Today we're counting down the top 5 most surprising facts about the Strait of Hormuz. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why the whole world is watching. Let's go. Number 5. The Strait of Hormuz has 2 shipping lanes. Each one is exactly 2 miles wide. 2 miles. That is the channel through which a significant fraction of the entire world's energy supply must pass. 2 miles in each direction, 1 lane for ships coming in, 1 lane for ships going out, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone in between. To put that in perspective, the shipping lane is approximately the same width as Manhattan Island. Every supertanker, every LNG carrier, every vessel loaded with the oil that heats homes, powers factories, fuels aircraft, and runs the global supply chain, must navigate through a corridor roughly the width of one New York City borough. At its narrowest point, the strait itself is only about 30 miles wide, with Iran on the northern shore and Oman and the UAE on the southern shore. But the navigable deep water channel is far narrower than that. The traffic separation scheme, the internationally recognized lanes that govern the movement of large vessels, gives each direction of travel just 2 miles to work with. And through those 2 miles, on an average day, approximately 20 million barrels of oil flow out into the world. Every single day. That is roughly 1/5 of all the oil consumed on Earth every 24 hours. Passing through a channel that a strong swimmer could theoretically cross. The numbers that flow through those 2 miles are almost impossible to absorb. In 2025, nearly 15 million barrels of crude oil per day passed through the strait. Add petroleum products and liquefied natural gas and the total rises toward 20 million barrels per day. 1 tanker passes through roughly every 6 minutes. Around the clock, every day of the year. And there is, for most of the countries that depend on it, no alternative. Number 4. If the Strait of Hormuz closed tomorrow, Japan and South Korea would face an energy catastrophe within weeks. And there is almost nothing either country could do about it. Most people in the West think of the Strait of Hormuz primarily as an American or European concern. It is not. The overwhelming majority of the oil and gas that transits the strait goes east, not west. Approximately 80 to 89% of the crude oil passing through the Strait of Hormuz is destined for Asian markets. China and India alone receive more than 40% of total Hormuz oil exports. Japan sources approximately 95% of its crude oil needs from the Persian Gulf region. South Korea sources approximately 75%. Think about what those numbers mean for a moment. Japan is the world's 3rd largest economy. South Korea is the 10th. Both are sophisticated, technologically advanced nations with enormous industrial output and complex modern infrastructure. And both are almost entirely dependent on a single 30-mile waterway for the energy that keeps their economies running. If the strait closed, Japan could not simply switch suppliers. There are no alternative suppliers of sufficient scale. It could not reroute shipments. There is no alternative route. Its strategic petroleum reserves, maintained for exactly this kind of emergency, would buy weeks, not months. The same applies to South Korea, to Taiwan, to many of the fast-growing economies of Southeast Asia. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz would not be an inconvenience to Asia. It would be an economic catastrophe that would ripple through global supply chains, manufacturing outputs, and financial markets within days of closure. Even the United States, which has dramatically increased its own domestic oil production over the past decade and is far less dependent on Gulf oil than it once was, still relies on the strait for approximately 7% of its oil consumption. And regardless of what America imports directly, the impact of a closure on global oil prices would hit American consumers at the fuel pump within days. The price of everything you buy is, in ways most people never think about, partly set by what happens in a 30-mile strip of water between Iran and Oman. Number 3. The only country that can realistically close the Strait of Hormuz does not legally own it. And the country that does own the southern shore cannot stop it. The Strait of Hormuz does not officially fall under Iranian control. Under international maritime law, specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, all vessels have the right of transit passage through international straits. Iran cannot legally block it. The law is clear. Iran has a unique capability, due to its physical geography, to make that legal clarity completely irrelevant. Iran controls the entire northern coastline of the strait. It also controls several strategically positioned islands within the waterway itself: Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, Abu Musa, Lark, Keshem, and Hormuz Island. These islands are not merely territorial possessions. They are military positions. They host anti-ship cruise missile launchers, drone systems, mine-laying capabilities, and surveillance infrastructure that can reach every corner of the navigable channel. Iran does not need to physically block the strait to effectively close it. It needs only to make the risk of transiting it high enough that insurance companies refuse to cover vessels making the journey, and shipping companies refuse to send their crews and their billion-dollar tankers through a war zone. During recent escalations, insurance premiums for vessels transiting the strait have surged to levels that make many voyages economically unviable. When a tanker cannot get insurance, it does not sail. The strait closes not with a chain across the water but with a number on a spreadsheet in a London insurance office. Iran has built up, over several decades, what military analysts describe as one of the most sophisticated area denial systems in the world. Anti-ship cruise missiles, naval mines, submarines, surface-to-air missile systems, fast attack boats, kamikaze drones, all of it positioned to make the 2-mile shipping lanes of the Strait of Hormuz as dangerous as any waterway on Earth the moment Iran decides to use it. The country that legally owns the right of passage cannot guarantee it. The country that has no legal right to close it can make it effectively impassable. That asymmetry between legal right and military reality is the central tension that has defined the geopolitics of the Persian Gulf for decades. Number 2. The Strait of Hormuz has been attacked before, and the world survived. But what is happening right now is already more economically disruptive than anything that came before. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, the so-called tanker war saw both Iran and Iraq launch hundreds of attacks against oil tankers and vessels in the Persian Gulf and the strait itself. Hundreds of ships were struck, dozens were sunk. The United States Navy deployed to the region to escort Kuwaiti tankers. For years, the world's most important oil transit route was a shooting gallery, and yet the global economy absorbed it. Oil prices spiked. Insurance premiums soared, but the flow of oil, interrupted and damaged as it was, never entirely stopped. The difference between then and now is the scale of global dependence on the strait. In the 1980s, the world consumed significantly less oil. Alternative sources were more readily available. The global economy was less tightly integrated. A tanker that didn't make it through the strait was a serious problem. It was not a systemic threat to supply chains that stretch from Gulf oil fields to Chinese factories to European supermarket shelves. Today it is different. The world has built decades of economic infrastructure on the assumption that the Strait of Hormuz stays open. The just-in-time supply chains, the global shipping routes, the energy import strategies of a dozen major economies, all of it assumes those 2-mile lanes keep moving. A closure of the Strait of Hormuz that removes close to 20% of global oil supplies from the market is expected to raise the average price of oil to nearly $100 per barrel almost immediately. If that closure extends to 2 quarters, prices could reach $115 per barrel. 3 quarters and the price could hit $132, with global GDP growth turning negative. Those are not worst-case projections from alarmist analysts. Those are the current modeled estimates from the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, published in March 2026. And the number 1 most surprising fact about the Strait of Hormuz. Number 1. The Strait of Hormuz does not just carry oil. It carries the fertilizer that feeds the world. And almost nobody is talking about it. When the news covers the Strait of Hormuz, the conversation is almost always about oil, about petrol prices, about energy security, about the light staying on. All of that is real and all of it matters. But running alongside the oil tankers, through those same 2-mile lanes, are ships carrying something that matters even more to the basic survival of human civilization: sulfur. And through sulfur, fertilizer. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 45% of global sulfur exports. Sulfur is not a product most people think about. It does not make headlines. It does not have a futures price that appears on financial news tickers. But sulfur is a primary feedstock for sulfuric acid, which is essential in the production of phosphate fertilizers. And phosphate fertilizers are essential for the agricultural yields that feed approximately half the human population on Earth. The nitrogen-based green revolution of the 20th century, which prevented the mass famines that demographers predicted as the global population surged, depends on a continuous supply of fertilizers. And those fertilizers depend on sulfur. And a significant portion of that sulfur passes through the Strait of Hormuz. The strait also carries liquefied natural gas from Qatar, the world's third largest LNG exporter. Qatar has no alternative export route. Every cubic meter of gas it sells to Europe, to Asia, to the countries that use it for heating and electricity generation, must transit the strait. In 2025, over 112 billion cubic meters of LNG passed through the waterway, 20% of all global LNG trade. When people talk about the Strait of Hormuz closing, they imagine a petrol price spike. They do not imagine what happens to global food prices 6 months later when fertilizer supplies tighten. They do not imagine what happens to European heating costs when Qatari gas cannot reach the market. They do not imagine what happens to the pharmaceutical supply chain, the plastics industry, the electronics manufacturing sector, all of which depend on energy and petrochemical products that flow through those 2 miles. The Strait of Hormuz is not just an oil choke point. It is a civilization choke point. A single geographic accident of history, a narrow passage between one country and another, that has become so embedded in the infrastructure of modern human life that closing it would trigger consequences that reach into every corner of the world economy within weeks. 30 miles wide. 2-mile shipping lanes. 20 million barrels a day. 45% of global sulfur. 20% of global LNG. And right now, ships are burning in those lanes. The whole world is watching. Now you know why. That is our top 5. If this video explained something the news coverage didn't, hit subscribe. We cover the stories behind the headlines that most people never get around to fully explaining. Drop a comment below with what surprised you most. We will see you in the next one.